Hey you guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we are finishing up the leotard that we were creating last week. Now that you have your drape created, go ahead and take it off to dress form, and with your markings you need to smooth them out. So using your curve ruler, L ruler, all the rulers that you have, just go ahead and use them to smooth them out, and then from there you will transfer those markings onto paper to create your pattern. If you have not subscribed to the channel, please do so. We focus on fashion design, clothes making, just about anything when it comes to garment development. I don't know, later on maybe I might expand it to other things, but for now that's what I'm focusing on. Once you have everything traced down with your tracing wheel, go ahead and grab your markers so that you can mark those lines. Make sure you're smoothing it out as you go with your ruler. The last part was the sleeve cap. I was having a hard time with it, and I stumbled upon this little idea. I'm like, okay, if I flip it outwards, then I'd be able to get the actual shaping of where it needs to go. So that's what I did. I almost placed it perpendicular. I placed the sleeve perpendicular to itself, and with that I marked it. At the time I was doing it, I had no idea if it was gonna work, but it did. And I think another reason why it did is because this material is stretchy, so you can't really go wrong with stretchy fabric. It can like just be too tight, but I mean, if it's too loose, then obviously you just gotta take it in. If it's too tight, then it's just kind of more fitted. But again, once you measure with where the curvature ends, and you know that it's good spacing, then you're fine. Like, you could just measure your arm and make sure that it will actually fit, and it did. So that's how I made my sleeve, y'all. Building up the hem of the sleeve was a little bit difficult, only because I was having a hard time trying to find the grain line. But I realized if you fold it in half and you mark up the underarms where the seam would be, exactly where it is on both sides, then it's pretty much going to be on grain because you're folding it in half. From there you can get the distance. From my underarm to the hem of the sleeve, I wanted to be 23 inches, and my wrist was 8 inches. So with it being folded in half, you have 4 inches on both sides. You go ahead and mark it. From there you have your two reference points, and you can connect the line and make your seam for your sleeve. Once you're done making that pattern, the next thing you need to do is cut it out. Once you cut it out, add your annotations. Make sure you notate what it is, because it's really easy for you to get patterns mixed up. Well, for me it is, because I have a ton of patterns. Add your sizing, what it is, your cut amounts. Make sure you mark your grain line. Add your notches, and then you are ready to copy the back drape onto paper. Once you copy it, be sure to hold that pattern right on the seam line with the front. Hold the back pattern right on the seam line with the front where they're supposed to be meeting, and you're going to balance it out, because you don't want one seam or one pattern to be longer than the other or giving off like an uneven line. You want it to be nice and smooth. It needs to transition from one side of the pattern to the next. So by holding it against each other, you can see exactly where that pattern needs to go and how that line is flowing smoothly. Once your back is situated, make sure you follow that curvature. Y'all, don't come for me. I can see that the back is not symmetrical. From the left side to the right side, it's not symmetrical. It's actually asymmetrical. And the reasons why I kept it that way is because you have the sleeve that's wrapping around the neckline, you know, going into the sleeve on one side. Therefore, the left side I made higher than the right, as you can see up here. I could have made that right side a little bit lower, but I don't know, I just didn't, just to test it out and see how it would come out. Maybe the second one I make, maybe I'll modify the pattern and lower it. But once you're done with the back and the front, you're ready to move on to the actual bottom. This is going to be all one leotard, so eventually we're going to attach the pattern. I went ahead and I grabbed one of my bathing suits so that I can copy. So you get a little bit of learning how to knock off. Once you stabilize it onto your paper, you can go ahead and trace it all around. You can give yourself a little bit of spacing in between, but try to keep it as tight and as smooth as possible. If you have one of those cork boards, you can actually pin it into the cork board with your paper in between, of course, so that you can trace it. But besides that, just follow it exactly as is. Always make sure you give yourself enough spacing so that you can add seam allowance. As you can see here at the waistline, I have no additional space, so I'll probably have to cut some paper from some remnant and attach just so that I can have additional spacing. Go ahead and make your pattern, smooth it out, find your grain line, extend the front. Always remember that the front is a little bit longer than the back, only because you want that seam from where the front attaches to the back at the crotch area. You want it to go more towards the back than the front. So the front will always be a little bit longer. Once you have your seam allowance and everything looks good for the bottom, you can go ahead and smooth it out. Now, remember, this is stretchy material. This material is a 4-way stretch. So just smooth out as much as possible. If it's not smoothing out perfectly, it's okay, because again, it's stretchy material and it has grace. Repeat the same procedure for the back, and once you're done, you're gonna balance the back of the pattern to the front. So that side seam where the only seams you're gonna have, make sure you balance them to each other so that they are lining up. It's very important that they balance on the side. Once you're done creating the pattern, be sure to add your annotation. Your annotation should include the section of the garment that it is. So if it's like for your center back, center front, your sleeve, always make sure you notate that. The type of garment that it is, a leotard, a dress. If you have a style number, right now would be the good time for you to put that on there. Write the amount of times you're cutting it. If it's going to be face up, any additional information that is needed, be sure to add that on there. Once you're done, pin your fabric, go ahead and cut. And the next thing you should do is to measure your opening. So wherever you have an opening, I want you to measure it. The only thing you're not going to measure is your sleeve hem. That's not going to be needed because you're just going to just cover stitch right over it. But everywhere else you're going to add elastic, you need to measure it so that you can know. So the very first thing you're going to sew is the crotch. Sew straight across the crotch with the regular zigzag stitch, and then from there you are going to sew your side seams. Once you're done with your side seams, you'll sew your sleeve. Once you're done with that, you can go on to your cover stitch or whatever treatment you are going to do to your seam allowance. Right now would be the best time to do that. This is an overview on what it's looking like. I went ahead and I cover stitched the side seam. The seam allowance is actually cover stitched to the back, and I also cover stitched the crotch area. The next thing would be to use the measurements that we took of the openings so that we can get our elastic length. Go ahead and divide the leg opening into 4, and then with the measurement that you had when you had measured the original pattern, for every 10 inches you can take off an inch, and then you'll divide the elastic itself into 4 too and match those pins onto the fabric. Do the same for the neck opening, but with the neck opening, instead of dividing it into 4, you will divide it by 10. needle first into the elastic and slightly stretch the elastic, just so that your fabric is not like bunching up. So you're going to stretch that elastic just so that your fabric can lay flat. Once you match up the pins from the elastic onto the fabric. Once you are done with adding the elastic in, now you need to cover it. Go ahead and just roll that elastic twice just so that it is encased into the fabric, and you can zigzag stitch it all the way on top. For this portion here, you don't necessarily have to stretch it so that it lays flat. The zigzag stitch will allow for it to have stretch as you go. So just sew right on top of it. Just make sure that you smooth out your fabric so that it's not folding or creasing over. So just like we did with the leg opening, we're going to repeat the same thing for the neckline opening. Again, match up the pins that are on the elastic to the pins that are on the fabric. Remember, you're using 10 different pins, just so that you have a smaller distance. And again, you're going to stretch that elastic so that your fabric can lay flat, and sew from pin to pin. So this wraps it up for today. For this last portion, just make sure you go as smooth as possible. Try to keep your spacing between your zigzags consistent, otherwise it will show since this is the last step. But this is an overview on what the garment looks like. You can dress it up in so many different ways. Next week I'll show you how you can convert it into this dress. But besides that, I will see you next time. Do subscribe, like, and share. Add any questions that you have down below, and I'll see you next time. Happy sewing!